today we're going to talk about a book that is not technically one of the great books, but is crucial for teaching ancient civilization and the great books. And that book is Mythology by Edith Hamilton. It really is a wonderfully written book, and she is an expert in her field, so it's well worth reading for any reason. I'm going to try to persuade you this should be a part of your curriculum first, and then we'll talk about what I wish I knew before I taught Mythology by Edith Hamilton. Number one, with regard to mythology, there still is such a thing as cultural literacy. I know a lot of people are familiar with E.D. Hirsch and the cultural literacy movement, and it's true. As members of Western civilization, we should be literate about certain things, certain facts, certain attitudes that sort of permeate our culture, or at least in the past they did. And of course, a lot of the ancient Greek myths fit into that category. When someone says, "I feel like I opened Pandora's box," they're referencing a Greek myth, and it's something that we should be familiar with so that we don't have to stop the conversation right there and get an explanation. So definitely cultural literacy is a part of it. I do think you'll just enjoy reading this book as well. It's very well written, but also too, as C.S. Lewis points out, there are myths that point us to the truth. Yes, they're about these crazy gods like Zeus and Aphrodite, and they don't seem to be in line with Scripture at all. But Lewis is quick to point out that sometimes myth can give a glimpse of the truth. He says in Miracles, "Myth is, at its best, a real, though unfocused gleam of divine truth falling on human imagination." And then he goes on to point to especially the myths of the dying gods, right? He was touched when he was young by the story of Balder, and this is the story of a god who is sacrificed. And Lewis recognizes that those sort of poignant stories can point us to the true story of Christ's death and resurrection. And it's not just true of myths of dying gods. Lewis actually takes the myth of Cupid and Psyche and turns it into this wonderful novel, Till We Have Faces, one of my top 20 books of all time. If you haven't read Till We Have Faces yet, you should. But you should be familiar with the story of Cupid and Psyche before you pick up that book. So that's why I think we should be reading Mythology by Edith Hamilton. And then this is what I wish I knew before I started teaching Mythology by Hamilton. First things first, you don't have to read the entire text. I recommend reading just the chapters 1, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, and 14, and 22 and 23. There's certainly things within the text that you can skip. And then when I came to this work, I was a little confused about why we skipped over Rome. So we have ancient Greece, and then Hamilton gets into Norse mythology as well, but doesn't have much time for the Romans. And as you probably already know, the Romans just borrowed wholesale from the Greeks. They didn't bother to create their own pantheon of gods. Instead, they just renamed Zeus as Jupiter. They rename Aphrodite as Venus, and then they just move on as though those gods belong to them. So there's no real discussion of Roman mythology in this text, and that's the reason why. I also wish I knew how much backstory this book is going to provide for truly great books like the Iliad. When I first came to the Iliad, I thought the whole story of the Trojan War was in there, that we would get the wooden horse at the end of the story, that we would get Paris deciding between the goddesses in terms of who's most beautiful. And if you're familiar with the Iliad, that's not the case. The Iliad is very focused in on one particular moment in the war, and specifically the wrath of Achilles. So a lot of context is provided both for the Iliad and for the Odyssey in this book, Mythology by Hamilton. The third, maybe the fourth reason, I've lost count, that we also need to be familiar with Mythology by Hamilton is that you will find modern atheists, especially as the Enlightenment is really getting moving, sympathizing with the story of Prometheus. You may be familiar with the story. Prometheus steals fire from the gods for man, and then he is condemned to suffer for eternity because of his transgression against the gods. And at first, you hear that story and you think, well, there's echoes of the fall of Adam and Eve in there, right? And a lot of atheists then take Prometheus and set him up as Adam in the Genesis story. But there's an important difference that we need to notice. Prometheus's transgression is not really a transgression at all. He is concerned with being merciful to mankind. So he suffers unjustly, and central to the story of Prometheus is this idea that Zeus is dealing unjustly with someone lower than him. And of course, from the Christian view, Adam and Eve, when they fell, they had been warned explicitly by God not to do this one thing. They did this one thing. It was open rebellion. It wasn't just a mistake. And we are punished justly for the sin of Adam and Eve. So there's this temptation. You'll run across Prometheus Unbound by Percy Shelley. It's a play by Percy Shelley, and you're going to be tempted to sympathize at first with Prometheus. He appears to be on our side. He appears to be sort of an idealized man. It's tempting to side with him. We shouldn't. That is the case is being set up by Shelley that Adam is unjustly accused and unjustly punished, and it's really this raging against the God of the Bible. Ironically, right, the subtitle of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein identifies the monster as Prometheus. Same sort of story. We won't get into that here, but that's a lot to think about with regard to that particular myth, the myth of Prometheus. And then finally, and I think this is the thing that I wish I knew the most going into teaching mythology. The Greek stories of creation and the Norse story of creation all underscore how different the Genesis account of creation really is. Every other creation myth, and they are myths, that you read will have gods being created or gods coming to pre-existing matter and then shaping that matter into the world around us. And it really is only Genesis that makes this startling creation assertion that God created out of nothing, that in the beginning, God. We can't overstate how unique that philosophical statement is. Now, it's true that other world religions, Judaism and Islam, both start out with Genesis 1:1, but it is that Genesis 1:1 statement, well, the whole Genesis 1 account, that sets up this remarkable idea of an eternal God who is triune, so he is not lonely. He is not creating for the sake of taking care of the problem of loneliness. This triune God who doesn't need anything, is completely fulfilled in himself, creating out of nothing. The power and the majesty of that creation story shines over Greek myths of creation, the Norse mythology of creation. So as Christians, we can bring that to bear on the lesson as we're teaching our students about these very pagan ideas that every once in a while do contain divine glimpses of the truth.